Hello and welcome to ChatGCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast, and I'm your host, Charles Beasley. On today's episode, we have Dr. Simon Malpas. Simon is a distinguished New Zealand scientist and entrepreneur and has co-founded 3 successful medical device and life science companies from his research, the latest of which being Kitea Health, a startup transforming healthcare for people living with chronic conditions via the monitoring of physiological pressure. In this episode, Simon and I discuss how Kitea's technology can help us graduate from a reactive model to a proactive model of healthcare for chronic conditions, and Kitea's plans to address the unmet clinical need in patients with hydrocephalus, as well as Kitea's commercialization journey to date, culminating in their upcoming first-in-human clinical trial slated for 2024. This was a super interesting discussion with plenty of insights for the budding life science entrepreneur. And as someone with a passion for clinical research, I'll be watching their progress closely over the coming months. On another note, today's episode is brought to you by SAPRO, your clinical trial pathway partner. Every clinical trial is unique, and the most effective solution is to engage with a distinguished and highly experienced project consultant who can tailor your needs and ensure that your trial is delivered on time with the highest integrity and all risks considered. Check out the links to SAPRO services in the show notes below. But now, friends, please welcome Dr. Simon Malpas. All right, welcome to the podcast, Simon. So great to have you on this morning.
Thank you.
So I must say, this is a little bit of a surreal moment for me because in the far reaches of the 2000s, 2009 exactly was my first year at university, and you would have been one of the lecturers at Auckland University those many moons ago, and now you get to grace me with your presence on my podcast. So coming full circle.
I'm sure there's a T-shirt that says I was lectured by Simon Malpas.
Yeah, and there'll be a huge contingent of people that could sell that to.
I think I got to about 25,000 students over the years. So it was a long journey.
Oh, way to make me feel insignificant, Simon. I thought it was more important
I
than that.
remember you. You were that guy. No. Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really excited because you obviously you're on quite a mission, aren't you? I mean, you've had an illustrious career to date, and now obviously we're here to talk about Kitea Health and your role as CEO. But looking back over all the years and all the research projects and all the lecturing, what is the kind of overarching mission that you're on? Oh. Putting you on the spot here.
That's a hard question to kick off with. I don't know that there is a mission as in one's life mission. Mm-hmm. I think things evolve with time, and maybe you see opportunities. You know, in life you're presented with doors. Do I go through that door or stay where I am? Yeah. The worst thing you can do is often just stay where you are. You have to make choices. And I like looking for interesting opportunities. I didn't, as a 18-year-old going into university, I didn't say I'm going to do this and start down that path. Very much no. It's a discovery and a journey, and who knows what the next chapter will be.
I love that. I had this discussion with a friend of mine, and he kind of clued me into that way of thinking, because when we think of overarching mission, there's one directive that we're heading towards, and that hasn't changed in the last 20 years. Kind of what you're speaking to, there's no one absolute goal, it's just wherever the work takes you.
Well, I think the thing is in life, this is very philosophical now, quite off target, but it is about if you've got the right mentality, open-minded and interested in challenges. I like challenges, whether it be something DIY at home or something more scientific. Life is challenging at times, and sometimes there's great opportunities. And if you say, well, that looks interesting, that can provide the next path. And often in research, you don't know in 2 or 3 years' time what the research project, what the exact experiment you'll be doing will be. You often tend to go down an initial hypothesis and answering that opens up the next question, which is another turn in the road, and then another turn, and before you know it, you've meandered all over a field of area, and that's often the journey that people take.
Yeah. What was there a eureka moment that kicked it off for you that you wanted to pursue the research pathway?
In terms of being at school and
university, or maybe
no,
some people.
It was sort of probably more that I didn't want to get another job, in the sense I didn't want to, I'd done an undergraduate degree, an honours degree, and thought, well, this research looks interesting, and it's sort of something that I felt I could, contribute to, and it was sort of not really with any train track of a view of where it would take me.
Yeah. So it's just that curiosity, that interest, that drive, that problem solving, and also not wanting to get a normal job.
Well, I don't know about not wanting to get a normal. It was just more. It was always interesting opportunities.
Sure. Yeah.
I was interested in travel. What better career can you have than being able to work anywhere in the world, anywhere, as a researcher? I spent 2 years in Japan, postdoc there, and there's not many people at that time that would, unless you were going to teach English, and I didn't speak Japanese. What would be the job you could do? Do research. So it was that, that sort of different opportunity.
Excellent. Did you learn Japanese while you were there?
A little bit.
Yeah. Enough to get by, but they're very like
absolutely.
That's so interesting. So what was the? I remember way back. This is going back into the 2009 again. I'm going back to, 19-year-old Charles sitting in that lecture hall.
I remember you.
But even back then, you had founded a few, or you had patented a number of different devices back then, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so really the gestation of that was we were doing some basic research in a physiological sense. I was interested, or I still am interested, in blood pressure control. And as part of that research, we needed, as so often happens, you need to develop tools to enable your research. So we were building some interesting tools. They were wireless physiological monitoring systems for laboratory animals, so not for humans at that point. And my colleague David Budget and I, this is 2003, it's a long time ago, we're sort of working on this problem solving, and it was sort of a gestation of a discussion. Look, I think it's our problem we're trying to solve, but this is a problem that others have as well. And could we make it into a business with no idea what that meant? And that was the sort of gestation of it, really the starting point.
Yeah, was that done in New Zealand? Or was it?
Yeah, so that was telemetry research. We founded that in 2004, and we then sold that to a US medical device life sciences company, Miller Instruments. Miller it is now, in 2011-12. And I continued to operate the New Zealand office in an R&D sense for another 4 years after that. So it was continuing on the same evolution before we exited that.
Yeah. And was there so the current company that you're CEO of is Kitea Health, and that one telemetry. Was there a one between the two of them?
Not well. Miller was the evolution. They were the acquirer, and I was working in that, and we had a strong R&D focus in that.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So why don't we pivot to Kitea? So I actually, you might have seen, I think you did see actually, I had Kieran Jenner on. Yes. So this is all part of the same ecosystem. Obviously, Kieran, Pacific Channel Venture Capital.
They're our lead investor.
Yep. Love their work and enabling a lot of these awesome technologies. But so what was the idea around the flagship device or the platform that you're developing at Kitea and the kind of the need that we have there?
Yeah. So really, it importantly has always started with the clinical need. And the way I explain it very, very quickly is that for most of us, we have friends, whānau at home that have chronic health conditions, lifelong conditions. They might be a child with a neurological condition. They might be an elderly person in heart failure. And what we see currently is that the pathway for monitoring and managing those people, their health, is a very reactive care. You wait until Aunt Ethel is deteriorating with symptoms of congestion and fluid retention in the lungs, and eventually it gets to a point where those symptoms say, okay, we better take you to hospital. So you go to hospital, then you get treatment modification, and then you come home. And whether it be a child with, say, in our case, one of our key clinical conditions, hydrocephalus, that's a recurring sort of nightmare for parents, as they are frequent flyers to our healthcare system. And it was realizing that the problem is that we're very much stuck in a reactive care model. And if we can monitor people in their own homes, truly monitor, physiologically monitor, we can get early indications of deterioration, of changes before symptoms occur. So rather than wait until you have got the screaming headache where pressure in your brain is going up, if we could monitor that early on and say, no, you're all good. It could just be food poisoning. It could just be a bad night for your child, who may not be verbal at that point. So we can do proactive care, and therefore, if you do proactive care, you can treat people early. You catch symptoms, catch things before they become symptomatic, and bring them into hospital, get treatment early, or you can weed out the false alarms. For someone who has a chronic condition, they're often thinking, "Oh, we've got this headache. Is that truly a headache, or is that something more sinister?"
Yes.
And so that's the gestation. That's the journey we're on to change that paradigm, and we do that through pressure monitoring. So my area of interest for many, many years has always been around what does pressure mean? What does it mean within the body? And not just blood pressure, heart, and the pulmonary, and the lungs, and the cardiovascular system, and in other areas of the body as well.
Right.
It makes it's so critical in the eye, for example, in the kidney, and all of these things. Pressure is important. Probably the most important in the brain in terms of too much pressure. Even a few millimeters mercury increase can have an impact on perfusion through key areas of the brain. So,
because when we think of pressure, it's just, you go to the doctor and they wrap that little strap around your arm and they wait 5 seconds and go, oh, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
within
that's
a certain range. But that's systemic blood pressure.
Yes.
Whereas you're referring to like individual organs or individual tissues.
Yeah. So, pressure drives perfusion, and for extruding out oxygen, good stuff, glucose, and then picking out waste products with lower pressure. And when you get to areas like the brain or in different parts of the cardiovascular system, not the arterial system, you can't measure that any other way than actually getting in there. Now, if it's very acute, a couple of minutes to hours or maybe a couple of days, you can, in the case of hydrocephalus, drill a hole in someone's skull and put in a catheter and make that measurement. And obviously that's a hospital setting. You are sitting in bed with this thing coming out of your head, and there's a monitor there, and they'll be saying, oh, well, that's good. No, that's not good, that sort of thing. So you can't do that any other way and people have tried non-invasive tools, but there's nothing validated. You have to measure directly. So, which is what we're proposing is a means to proactively monitor in our first clinical condition, hydrocephalus, those patients to be monitored at home. So directly measuring pressure in the brain. Yeah. And what's actually happening is these people have the shunt that's draining away this excess fluid. Fantastic, keeps them alive, otherwise they die. But the shunts fail, worst failure rate of any medical device. 50% in 2 years will fail for children. So you've got a situation that your young child is at home and doing well, and then they're a bit irritable or they start vomiting. That happens all the time with little kids. So parents are attuned to this and they're off to hospital. And, we were reviewing cases yesterday, and, some of these kids are every couple of months they're in hospital for a stay, for observations, an MRI, and then they're sent home. So it's it's determined it's not the shunt. Yep. It's food poisoning, a headache, something else. So it's very hard for neurosurgeons, neurologists, and parents to know when the shunt's failing because we rely solely on symptoms currently. So our technology is all around actually providing accurate and data which then can be actionable. So, no, the shunt is definitely failing. We will operate tomorrow or now. Or replace it, and you'll be good to go. Or, no, I don't think it's the shunt. It is something else. Infection, food poisoning, headache, just non-specific headache, but it doesn't require the shunt to be replaced.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, you can avoid some of that tragedy of going to the hospital for when you don't need to. Yep. So that will lower costs and reduce anxiety and well-being.
And the health economic application as well must
absolutely
be pretty strong if you can avoid inpatient stays.
we think the estimate we have is that we can lower healthcare costs for these patients by 30 to 40%. So through our technology. Yeah.
So taking a step back, if you have too much too much pressure in the brain. So how does that arise? And then what are the kind of physiological manifestations of that? Is it, so there's buildup of fluid and then that creates pressure and...
Yeah, so in the spaces in the brain, the ventricles, fluid filled with cerebral spinal fluid. We produce roughly half a litre a day. The spaces aren't that big between the cavities in our brain, and that's absorbed. So it's produced and reabsorbed at a pretty constant rate. And it's either the defect is in too much production of fluid or not enough excretion of that fluid. Now, it can be a congenital disease. Spina bifida almost always has hydrocephalus. It can be due to trauma, so there can be a bleed on the brain. So that can occur at any age.
Right.
It can be a trauma through an accident, car accident sort of thing. So there are a range of different examples for the cause of it, but it's most common in children. And effectively, this fluid, if you have too much fluid, brain, skull being solid, it's closed. So you've got so your blood pressure is the inflow as driving blood, and then it's being opposed by the intracranial pressure. And the result is cerebral perfusion pressure. And that's actually the key number. We don't measure that directly. We measure it by intracranial pressure and blood pressure, and one minus the other.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So if intracranial pressure goes up, you cannot perfuse the tissues as well, and when you don't perfuse tissues well, they don't get enough oxygen, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's why people with severe cases will, they'll become unconscious very quickly, and it's really life-threatening.
Right, and then you get tissue hypoxia or
exactly.
Tissue death.
You can have permanent damage if it's not treated early enough. Yeah.
What's the scale of the problem? So you kind of mentioned that it's agnostic to the original cause. It might be congenital, it might be accident, somewhere in the middle of that. How many cases are we?
Yeah. So in New Zealand, it's a rubbery number in the sense the estimate is there are roughly 100 new cases a year, but it's a lifelong condition. So you end up with quite a population.
Oh, so if it's an injury, it will be lifelong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally. And the dependency on the shunt may change over time, but if you're talking children, it's lifelong.
Yeah.
And you can have situations where some children will have 10 to 15 shunt revisions, so neurosurgical procedures before they're 18. Now that's not so common, but they certainly have such a high failure rate. So another way of looking at numbers is it's about the same number that would be eligible for a cochlear implant. So if you're talking about the scale of the market from an economic perspective, cochlear implants are now well described. They're broadening out their use case, but they started with profoundly deaf children and adults and providing that implant, and that's our same population size. And you can look at the company Cochlear and its scale and what it's gone to, and there are more than one of those around. And we think that the platform has both. Initially, our focus is on this hydrocephalus market, but there are other applications for measuring pressure as well outside of that.
Yeah. So in the hydrocephalus one, what does the implant look like, and where does it? So is it measuring in the?
Yeah. So fortunately, pressure is uniform across the brain, across the skull. We wanted to make it as non-invasive in terms of the surgery.
Yeah.
We didn't want to do a new surgery to place our device. So what the intent is that we piggyback on an existing surgical procedure.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, if someone is coming in for a revision of their shunt, so they're already having a hole drilled to place the shunt, we piggyback on that procedure, and our device will sit alongside the shunt it's in the brain tissue. And it's 2 millimeters by 3 millimeters by 20, so long and skinny.
Yeah,
long and skinny. So it's actually got about the same, slightly smaller diameter than a shunt tube, which is draining the fluid. So it's relatively atraumatic, or it's very similar to other devices that are routinely placed and live in the brain for decades. So we're confident that it's not damaging the tissue, and patients will make a good recovery. So that's that, and it sits directly in the cortex.
Right.
And so we are the first microimplantable discrete brain sensor. There's everything else that you put in the brain is connected to a wire, a catheter, electrode, deep brain stimulation devices. All the brain computer interfaces that are being developed are still some sort of little box, and then a cable going to areas of vision. So we are the first discrete microimplant developed, which is scary and challenging and wonderful all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. So does it require an external power source, or is it ambient?
So this is really the cool stuff, is that we've been working in wireless power for a long time, 15 plus years. And we have a patent portfolio around how do we send power to an implanted device that is relatively deeply in the tissue. You can, like if your mobile phone charging, it's millimeters separation, and if it's too far away, it stops working. Yeah. Or your toothbrush or other things, other consumer devices.
Got too thick a case.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to send power up to 15 centimeters. So it'll cover all of the body as well as into the brain as well. And so our technology is we effectively beam power in using an external wand, and then we receive the data back, receive the pressure waveform. Okay. We actually get the waveform, not just very low sampling frequency, so we can see the individual heartbeats on the recording.
That's that does sound quite science fiction.
Yeah. But part of the specialization of wireless power for medical, as opposed to say consumer electronics, is you can't have your implanted device getting hot. Yeah. That would be a bad thing, particularly in the brain.
Oh yeah.
You also want to deliver the right amount of power over the right distance without trauma to the tissue, heating and things. So that's really where the secret sauce is.
Yeah. So as in terms of like engineering, the pressure sensing, that's quite an easy problem to solve relative to the power? Or?
I wish. No, unfortunately, I mean, one of the great things is we have a fantastic team, and the team covers a spectrum of expertise, wireless power, instrumentation around miniaturization. So you're making a tiny microfit. The space, the cavity where we have the electronics is only 1 millimeter by 10 millimeters, 12 millimeters long. So it's very, very small. So we have a circuit in there that is which we have developed. Our own microprocessor is in there. Pressure sensing is actually incredibly hard. It's easy to do short term, but it's really hard to do long term with accuracy, because what happens is most things change over time. Yep. And we have to we spend a lot of time constructing a system where we miniaturize but keep the drift as low as possible, and to make sure that it's an accurate measurement.
Sure. Oh, so drift in the actual measurement, not necessarily the actual
the device
physiological.
doesn't. No, the physical device does not move in the brain tissue, but just the actual measurement value. Yeah, you can imagine if it said normal brain pressure is somewhere 5 to 10 millimeters mercury. So it's low compared to arterial pressure, which might be 120/80 or something like that. So it's low, but you can imagine if the drift is 5 millimeters over a month, well, you're 50% of your scale is you've changed, and patients and physicians want to know that if the value is 5 yesterday and it's 10 the next day, they want to know that it has gone up 5, not the system is drifting over time. So that's important.
In a normal patient, what would be the range of pressure values that they might experience?
Well, certainly if pressure is over 20 millimeters mercury, that is an emergency situation. They will certainly have strong symptoms at that point. But it's interesting. So we've never been able to measure pressure in hydrocephalus patients under well conditions because there's no means to measure pressure. So we don't have an evidence base to say, here's normal under your normal. I mean, it certainly changes with body position.
Sure.
We absolutely know that. You put your head down, pressure will go up to 30 or 40 millimeters mercury, but it's only short term. Stand up, it might go to 0 or even less than 0. So it does vary dynamically like pressures do all around the body. But it's the long-term average value, and that's probably between 5 to 7 millimeters mercury, so pretty low.
We'll get back to the discussion with Simon in just a moment, but I wanted to remind you about today's sponsor, SAPRO. If you're planning on conducting a clinical trial for your device or medicine, consider SAPRO your clinical trial pathway partner. Engaging SAPRO will keep you and your collaborators on track, ensuring your strategic objectives are met and that your product is approved as soon as possible. For the small biotech or pharmaceutical company, SAPRO offers tailored CRO solutions from start to finish with their reputable alliance partners. When it comes to your clinical trial program, don't settle for cookie-cutter approach offered by those big CROs. Instead, partner with SAPRO today. Yeah, and for a patient that has a failed shunt, I mean, that'd be a fairly high jump in that pressure, but it'll be sustained, and that's the...
Yeah, so that might, depending on how dependent they are on the shunt for removing the excess fluid, that could occur over hours or days or weeks. So again, we really don't know because we've never measured pressure. So sometimes patients will come into hospital and they will have an invasive procedure to measure for a day's the intracranial pressure before they make a decision about shunt replacement. Sometimes it's not desirable because it's it's difficult. Not expensive, but it's traumatic for the patient, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find this stuff fascinating because I had Professor Greg O'Grady on the podcast, and you're looking at the electrophysiology of, when we think of electrophysiology, it's brain, heart, and now they're applying it to the gastrointestinal system because the body is awash, of course, in electricity or electrophysiology. And then this is like, pressure, the layman goes, just wrap it around the arm, but then of course the whole body is under some kind of pressure, and that's how it gets perfused. And you mentioned that there are other applications potentially down the line aside from hydrocephalus in any tissue.
Yeah, so our first key clinical condition is hydrocephalus, and people have said, well, why are you doing that one? Because it's such a relatively small market. And I argue, well, it's one of the biggest unmet clinical needs around in terms of number of patients. It's children, it's lifelong, and we can make a serious difference to those patients. The next largest next clinical indication is really in heart failure, in monitoring mostly, of course, elderly and pressures mostly in the pulmonary circulation. So people get congestion, fluid retention, pressure rises in the pulmonary artery, and we can measure that. Well, our device will be able to measure that. Now, there are other competing technologies for that space, so we wouldn't be the first one. For the cardiovascular applications and chronic implant, is a very, very long road Very doable, but technically, but you're talking of trials that can be 300, 400, 500 patients. And those are very expensive and very long.
Right.
And so we said, well, we could do that, but we're coming up against other competitors in the market that are years ahead of us. Why don't we sort of take a different route and road test and road show that we can make a difference for another population where we're still monitoring pressure. It's still a value of pressure. The same device, it's the same device. The core technology does not change between the two sites. We're just putting it in a different location. Yeah. So that was the mantra behind that.
That's fantastic. Because, I mean, going after that absolute clinical need that there is there in these patients with hydrocephalus must, you know, I mean, it's not just about the business case. It's also about the client.
We started
clinical need.
We started really about 8 years ago with interactions with a great neurosurgeon, Peter Hepner, in Auckland City Hospital, who really presented the clinical issue, and we were familiar with brain pressure and what it meant and the issues around it. So it was almost a meeting of like-minded individuals to say, yeah, that really is a serious clinical problem, and that was the start of the journey on the hydrocephalus example.
Right.
Yeah.
And did I hear correctly that you will be embarking on the first in-human studies shortly? Yep.
Yes, we are.
So
we have submitted our application for ethical approval to conduct our first participant trial, and we will be undertaking, if the approval is granted, of course, 10 adults and 10 children in Auckland City Hospital, probably April or May of next year is the target. So so this is the first active implantable medical device developed in New Zealand.
Yeah. So this is like proof of concept in humans.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So, well, I hope we've already got the proof of concept through our animal studies and bench testing, but this is a safety study initially. We don't have the volume of patients to show efficacy, like in terms of being able to do statistics on the results, but we certainly are looking for signs of outcomes. You know, if someone says, well, I was going to go to hospital and I didn't need to because I talked to my physician and we looked at the numbers that I was getting and I stayed at home and I come right. Yeah. That's an averted trip. So we will be capturing all of the events that occur subsequently. And we certainly are not expecting, of course, any safety-related issues, but we need to assess that. Yeah.
So these patients will they be patients with hydrocephalus or just any?
No. We are piggybacking on the procedure that they'll be having anyway. So they'll be coming into hospital. We don't know them. They don't know yet. They're coming in for their shunt revision, and they might come in with a couple of days' notice. So we can't, we're ready to go. So there is a consent process associated with that, and not everyone would fit into eligibility for being able to give informed consent.
So just for shunt revisions or like brand new shunts?
They could have a brand new shunt, but that's in the first case of the adults, it's unlikely, possible, but we're agnostic to that sort of part. But the intent is they'll be coming in for a shunt revision and we'll piggyback. So the increase in surgical time is probably 10 minutes. We're not talking a large time in terms of... And that's been an important point of difference, that we're not having to drill another hole in someone's head. We're not introducing a whole lot of extra risk associated with the procedure.
Yeah, definitely. And what has the feedback been from these physicians that will be potentially conducting the trial? They must be very excited about it.
I think so, but they are. And we have not only local neurosurgeons, neurologists, we have an international clinical advisory group, and they use the words, and other people have said the same thing, that this will be a game changer for this patient group. To move from a situation that they solely rely on their symptoms, or patient-reported symptoms, to actually having real numbers. It's a bit like the wearable glucose sensors, the blood pressure cuffs that people have at home. So we are merging into this new age of data, you know, that we have because we're at home with the data or an app on our phone. And we have an app as well that collects the data and they can see all the historical data. But effectively, that's this transition that we're moving towards, is where you collect because you wear the device or you use the device, and that you own that data, and that informs you of your status. And so rather than relying on symptoms, you know, I've got a headache or my gut's not feeling well, we actually we will actually be able to provide actionable data.
Yeah. And it's putting that objective data in the hands of the patient, give them a bit more authority or agency around their
that's certainly part of it. The idea is the information still goes to the physicians, so they can set in a notifications level, so they can review data if they want to, look at waveforms, if they want to call up patients and say you better come in. But effectively you're moving it to the parent patient in that in their home environment. You know, and a lot of these patients, of course, don't live in an hour from a neurosurgical emergency theatre. So that's even more serious. You know, if you live in, I don't know, Ahipara or somewhere like that, you've got a long journey to get to your hospital if you begin to suffer symptoms. So it's you potentially enable remote care through that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so all that data that will be collected, surely we're in this advent of, you know, like data mining and artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff. There will be, I imagine, potentially some like snippets of information that we have a huge kind of like data lake of information. There'll be
eventually
a little bit of playing around on that sandpit, shall we say.
Eventually, yes. I fully expect that there'll be some really excellent research questions that will be able to be answered on how we regulate brain pressure under normal daily life. You know, I can see, you know, if I was a teenager and had this device, I'd be standing on my head and making a measurement and doing all these, you know, that would be me. But you know, if I drink a litre of fluid, what will happen to my, you know, these? I'm not suggesting anyone would do that, but there will be an enormous opportunity for review of the data and informing pathology and normal physiology. So I do see a tremendous opportunity for good things to come out of that in a broader sense that others will go on and discover.
Yeah. So why don't we pivot to just to summarize, that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing the outcome of, you know, obviously that HTEC approval, get onto it. And get on with that study. So pivoting to the commercialization role in the CEO, what have been the main challenges that you've had to overcome in getting to this point with Kitea? Is it the building a team? Is it the designing the device and all that kind of testing that goes in? Is it raising the capital? Because often that's just as difficult as
and
other aspects.
All of those are challenges in different levels at different stages. And it's so we are a spin-out company from the Bioengineering Institute in Auckland, from the University of Auckland. I obtained a program grant from MB and some Health Research Council funding in 2016-17. So that was to build the team, and we already had components. Some people have been with me for a long time, and so this provided a big dollop of money that said now we can do this properly in a sense, right? You know, often it sounds like a lot of money, but you know, Health Research Council grants are shrinking in their magnitude. So $1 million sounds a great number, but the university takes a large chunk, and overheads. You actually end up being able to employ half a postdoc to do some excellent research. So we had a lot of money. We've had $14 million in non-diluting grant funding over 6 years now, and that has led to the platform. And so when we got to a point that we said, look, we're going to be moving towards the final stages of the R&D, it was then, okay, now is the time for more commercially oriented to get the next phase. Because it was going to take, you know, to do these sort of active implantable devices, you're talking in just non-specific to our situation, sort of potentially up to 50 million of before you've got an approved product. I'm hoping to get there for less, but we need to be aware that it's expensive when you're conducting clinical trials and things of your finished devices.
Yeah.
So the challenges all the way along. Building the team is an interesting, rewarding challenge. And I think we've just got a fantastic team that get on well. So I think importantly, developing the culture is so critical for me, that we have a culture that's welcoming, that's inclusive, and that it sort of recognises people's strengths and weaknesses, because we all have them. And then developing the strategy, and then obviously the execution on top of that. So there's, every day there's a different challenge. Are you running out? When's your run out of money date? When do you go red? That classic line, because we don't have any revenue, of course. So the line of money in the bank is just on a steady decline. Sort of sometimes it goes down quite quickly, and plotting that when it's going to go red, and therefore what you do about that, which is raising another round, and being able to meet those milestones. So we've been really focused on milestones, and we went to investors in the initial round, the seed round, and said, here's what we're driving towards. They bought into that, and we are on track to meet we have met all those milestones to date. Yeah.
And I imagine this first-in-human study, that's going to be the biggest of all milestones.
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, from a career perspective, it's always been my ambition to have a medical device that we had created that would be in use and to make a difference. And to see that, I freely say, when I'm in the theatre with Peter doing the first surgery and I'm sitting there writing notes, I'll probably have tears coming down my face as a sort of this event, because it is a big milestone that the team has worked very hard for a long period of time on, and it will be a culmination of so many of those things. And obviously we sure hope that person gets value from it. Is really what it's about. So yeah.
This is a bit of an odd question to ask, but I think if we want to build a really good commercialization and entrepreneurship industry, there are lessons that can be learned from successes as well as failures. Or what if looking back on maybe just exclusively Kitea or any of your other experiences, but what would you do had you had the opportunity to do it again? What would you do differently? I asked this question before, and someone kind of got offended at that, but
it's a really hard question to answer, because I think you might have things that you do differently. I did that yesterday, and I'd do it differently tomorrow or something like that.
Did I have enough caffeine in my system?
Yeah. Did I raise enough capital? Was I too ambitious with milestones? For Kitea, the experiences I'd had with previous companies really made me think about what would be the right milestones, not being promising the earth in that initial phase, and focusing. So I guess I have made most of the mistakes that I think can be made, probably not all of them, but I try to avoid making them again. And through that, in 2004 when we started our first company, we had no idea what we were doing, how much it would cost, how long it would take. Yeah. We didn't know anything about quality management and anything to do with that. So we were making all sorts of rudimentary mistakes. And through that learning, you've got to say, no, we're not going to do that again. Not going to do that. Yeah. And that's really helped. So when we started this new entity, which I'm so excited about, it was in some ways saying, well, I'm not going to make those mistakes again. And to date, I don't think we have. Yeah. I'm sure we're making other ones that we'll find out about, because it's the nature of life. And we're now moving into the next phase, which is more unknown, which is the clinical trials. And there could be some things that we maybe should have thought about in terms of the design of the study, but that's why it's still a research project in that setting before we move on to full regulatory approval.
I was speaking with Kieran Jenner, Passive Channel, and he said, successes and failures are all opportunity for the wider ecosystem to really learn and develop and upskill and just become more competent.
Yeah.
And I think what the likes of what you're doing and the other entrepreneurs and innovators, we're building that capacity within New Zealand, which is really quite exciting. What advice would you have for any budding entrepreneurs or med-tech guys with fantastic ideas?
Go for it. Just go for it. Networking is very important. One of the really nice things in New Zealand, and particularly in Auckland, is that I can literally walk 20 minutes and have a coffee with someone who's probably either had the same problem or... I mean, my device is different from theirs, sure, but we're still going through a lot of the similar stages. The capital raising is a classic one. So I think networking and developing those relationships, and the ecosystem is very supportive. That's really what I think is nice. I think in the US, as an example, which I have experience in, it's a lot more competitive between startups. Even though they're in different spaces, it's just kind of this natural competitiveness that is a little bit distasteful in the sense of forgetting the bigger picture here. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, I think we need to leave that there. But Simon, it's been so great to talk with you. If people want to find out more about yourself and Kitea, where can they go?
LinkedIn is a good one. Website, kiteahealth.com. But LinkedIn, we do post regularly updates and activities and things we're doing. We've had fantastic support from our investor group, and I think hopefully that'll continue.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to next year, May. Did you say when potentially
Roughly
that
May.
study
Yeah.
will kick off? That's awesome. Thank you so much.